there's really only two things that ever happen in this book, and it's Kip complaining about something and Kip and Scott hooking up. I DNF'd the first book in the Heated Rivalry book series, and I just honestly need someone to talk to about it. This is me after recording the video. I just want to say that there are going to be massive spoilers for Rivalry, the TV show, as well as spoilers for Game Changers, the book, because I am discussing in depth why I didn't like that book, and I am going to be citing specific instances in the book. I still don't think it's like truly spoiling because I didn't finish the book, so I don't quote unquote know what happens, but just in case you do plan on reading the book and you think you're going to enjoy it, this is a spoiler warning. I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff in here that happens in the book, and if you don't want to be spoiled, don't watch this video. Before I jump into the bulk of my review, I'm Autumn. This is my channel. I talk about books and other cozy hobbies like cooking and art and crafting and really just finding things to do around the house because I'm a homebody. I love to be at home. And this year I'm dedicated to finding more things to do at home and sharing my love of that with all of you. So if you are into any of these things, please consider subscribing to my channel and we can grow this community together. And if you like this video, please give it a like because it really helps my videos. I am actually so disappointed in this because I am a strong believer in the theory that the book is always better than the TV show. And I've been hearing so much positive feedback about the TV show Heated Rivalry. And specifically, I had heard a lot about Kip and Scott's relationship, which is the relationship represented in the first book of the series called Game Changer. So I was really excited to dive into that book first and then move on to Heated Rivalry before I watched the TV show. There has only been very few times where I have thought the movie was better than the book. That being said, I always do enjoy adaptations and I'm able to see them as their own pieces of art, but I always am a proponent for reading the book first before you go to see the movie or the TV show. So that is why I wanted to read the Heated Rivalry series, which is called Game Changers, before I got into watching the TV show. I'm very excited to watch the TV show. I've heard nothing but positive things from all of my friends and all over social media. I'm really excited. Although now that I've DNF'd the first book, my excitement has dimmed a little. So let's talk about why I DNF'd it and why I think it's a truly terrible book. I'm going to start with getting the elephant in the room out of the way. One of the most detrimental mistakes that I made when it came to this book was listening to the audiobook for part of it, because this is truly one of the worst audiobooks that I've ever listened to. And I am not exaggerating. In fact, I'm being generous when I say it's one of the worst. I think it is the worst audiobook I've ever listened to. And as someone who's listened to hundreds of audiobooks and loves audiobooks, that's saying something. This audiobook was so horrendous, it made me viscerally angry. There was parts where it was supposed to be hot or romantic or whatever, and I was laughing out loud because it was just so bad. And I was a little worried that I was overreacting about that, so I went onto Goodreads to try and validate my feelings and my visceral anger towards this audiobook. And I was completely validated. Almost every single mention of the audiobook is how cringy and terrible it is. And I am sorry to the narrator. I don't know if it was a creative choice on the narrator's part or on the producer's part, but the accent the narrator employed for the character of Kip was truly one of the most horrendous things that I've ever heard. Truly terrible. For reference, the character of Kip is supposed to be a native Brooklyn, New York type of guy. So he has like a Brooklyn style accent. But whatever this narrator did for his accent was truly horrendous. And I saw someone on Goodreads, if I can find the original comment, I saw someone on Goodreads describe it as a mix between Trump and Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator. Truly horrible. It sounded vaguely Eastern European for some reason, even though he was supposed to be from Brooklyn, New York. He was also supposed to be a 25-year-old man who sounded like, again, 60-year-old Eastern European man. It was so weird. It was so off-putting. I want you to go listen to the audiobook now just so you can understand where I'm coming from and commiserate with me. Like, I need somebody to hear this audiobook. I don't think I'm allowed to put clips of it in here because of copyright, but it is truly horrendous. Half the story is from Kip's point of view. He's more of the central character in this book than Scott is, and having to listen to this man speak for hours on end was a life-changingly bad experience. Just horrible. So we've got that out of the way. The audiobook is terrible. I would give it a 0 to 5 stars. I would give it like a negative 5 stars if I could. It was horrible. That being said, a bad audiobook doesn't necessarily mean the book is bad, right? It depends on the writing. It depends on the characters. So let's talk about the actual book itself. Now, for the record, I didn't start this as an audiobook. I started reading it as an ebook, and I didn't really like the pacing of the book. There was a lot of time jumps, and they would develop things off page, but not really explain how characters would jump to these emotional highs in their journey because they're happening off page. And that was a little bit jarring for me, which is why I decided to switch to audiobook, because sometimes when you can hear like the emotion of the character, you're able to connect to it a little bit better. At least that's how it is for me. Sometimes when I can hear the emotion of the character, I'm able to connect with them in a way that I'm not able to connect with them when they're just on the page. But then the audiobook was terrible, so I switched back to reading it on my Kindle. I thought it was going to get better. Unfortunately, it did not. I'm going to start with the characters and talk about why I specifically didn't really enjoy these characters, even though I feel they have potential, which is why I'm not scared about the show characters. I do think the show characters are still going to be really well done when they have a writer who puts care into like developing them as actual human beings. I just don't think this book did that. So I'm going to start with Kip, who is a man in his mid-20s. He's about 25, 26. I think he has a birthday in the book. So he's 25 when the book starts. He has a degree, which he is not currently using because he can't find a job in his field, which is understandable. He works at a smoothie shop where he wears like a goofy little strawberry hat, and it's like very tongue-in-cheek. It's very silly. However, this is a man who is very discontent in his life, and yet does not make any significant strides to actually change his situation. All he does is complain to everyone around him at all times. Like, he complains to his coworkers, he complains to his best friends, he complains to his boyfriend, but he doesn't actually do anything to change it. He applies to one job throughout the course of the book, at least as far as I read, and refused to search for jobs in other fields, which I think is like for complaining that he doesn't have a good job and he's working at the smoothie shop, maybe apply to other jobs in other fields, because he literally has people offering him jobs at other companies that are high paying, but he's like, well, it's not in my field of work. And I think that's ridiculous. Now, he works at a smoothie shop, and he also works as a waiter part-time for events and that type of thing, for fancy events. And he lives at home with his parents. So to me, a guy who works at a smoothie shop, lives with his parents, is a little bit of loser energy. We're not talking about a 19-year-old. He's in his like mid-20s. It's too old to be doing all that. Again, all he does is complain. I will say the one thing he had going for him is that there was setups for interesting relationships around him. Like, he has a friend who I felt, had that been developed, would have been really interesting. And he has a really interesting relationship with his parents. He has really supportive parents who seem to love and give him the support and love that he needs to thrive. That being said, he does not make any effort to have a relationship with anyone around him. Like I said, he has a really cute best friend, and she is very successful, very beautiful, and like a very good sidekick to him. Except for that, he never shows a single modicum of interest in anything going on in her life. Every single conversation in this book is around how he's feeling, how he's so down in the dumps, what his boyfriend is up to. He never once asks her about her life, and I find that really frustrating. I understand that the story is not about her, but if you want me to feel like this relationship is lived in and real and they've been best friends forever, he should care about what's going on in her life too. And, months pass in reading of the book, and he never once shows any interest in her life. And I find that extremely frustrating because she is used as only a plot device for him. And then on top of that, he has no personality. All he does is complain about how he doesn't have a good job that he likes. And his complaining is so constant that there's really only two things that ever happen in this book, and it's Kip complaining about something and Kip and Scott hooking up. That's it. Then we have Scott, who is the central love interest in this book, and he is a professional hockey player who's been a little bit down on his luck lately, but the start of this book signifies a turning of the tide where he's playing really well and having a lot of success in his field, and he is kind of a veteran on the team, so his teammates look up to him, and he is a man who is extremely hardworking, extremely diligent, and extremely focused. He does not have a family or a support system. His mother passed when he was younger, and he's kind of had to fight his whole life to get anything that he has. That alone is 10 times more interesting than anything about Kip. However, that is pretty much all there is to Scott. He has no other interests. He has really no friends. His entire life is just his teammates and hockey. There is nothing else to him of any substance or interest. He doesn't really have a personality. Like, I never see a clear and distinct personality come out in him. The banter between the two is awful because neither of them have a sense of humor or like any sort of quirk to them. And Scott is just really bland. Like, he's a nothing character. He's not an extremely bad character. He doesn't come off as an extremely bad guy. There's just nothing to him. There is no depth. There's nothing going on between the eyes. He's hot and he's a hockey player. That's it. So the entire premise of this book centers around the fact that Kip works at this smoothie store, and Scott walks into it one morning after having a very bad run on the ice late, and everyone's kind of upset with him because he's supposed to be the team's star player and he hasn't been performing that well. He goes into the smoothie shop, he meets Kip makes him the smoothie, and then that night he goes on to have a phenomenal game. He attributes this to Kip's smoothie, and he starts going back into the smoothie shop every day to complete this sort of like superstitious routine, getting a smoothie from the same person at the same place, and strikes up a bit of a flirtationship with Kip, starts inviting him out to hockey games, and then they run into each other one night while Kip is working an event as a waiter, and Scott is attending as a famous hockey player, and they hit it off and they end up hooking up, and the story sort of progresses from there. This is a very good plot and premise for a meet cute. I think it's such a great start to a little romance. I thought it had so much potential when I started reading it because of that. I was like, this is so cute. This is going to be a really cute little story between two guys who fall in love, and, you know, it's hockey romance, whatever. But I very quickly realized that there wasn't going to be any thought put into actual development of their relationship and deepening of their connection with one another. Everything is so surface level and very dependent on their physical attraction to one another. The writer didn't want to put any effort into developing personalities and quirks and flaws in these characters, so she just made them both really hot. And that's pretty much all there is to them. And it's really frustrating because I feel like there could have been so much there. On the topic of the smut, I love reading spicy books. I have no problem with smut. I just think that there's so much in this that it becomes less a romance book and more of like an erotica book, that it's like smut with a side of hockey. And it's really disappointing, because it takes away from what the relationship could have been, like what could have progressed to, if there wasn't so much focus on having smut in like every 3 chapters. And it got to the point where I was just like skipping scenes because it was so bad and so often that I was like, I get it. Like, nothing new to be discovered here. We get it. We understand it. They're sleeping together a lot. But nothing was happening in between that would lead me to believe that their connection is growing beyond anything but a physical and sexual connection to each other. There was no conversations happening about like their hopes, their dreams, their inspirations, their fears. There was no real diving into the relationships they have with their families, what friendships they have. Kip never expressed his dissatisfaction with his job in a real meaningful way, and how he felt that he wasted so much of his time on a degree that he's not able to use. In fact, he never even discloses to Scott that he had a job interview and didn't get the job, and how he was really upset about that. Scott never really talks to Kip about anything other than the fact that he plays hockey. Like, there is nothing going on between them. There is nothing going on upstairs in either of their heads other than sleeping together and hockey, and for Kip complaining. That's it. That's all there is to it. And I think one of the problems is that anything that did happen seemed to be developed off page and not really explained fully. There was quite a few time jumps in the book, and they weren't major time jumps, but they would jump ahead like the week, for example. So there was a specific example where they're hanging out at Scott's place for the weekend. They have a scene where Kip arrives, where they hook up. Then they jump ahead 3 days and say they spent the entire weekend there hooking up. And they jump ahead 3 days to another hookup scene. Maybe in those 3 days they had conversations and they got to understand each other on a deeper level, but none of that is actually written into the book. And I think that's so important for establishing the fact that these are two people who have a real connection. Again, it's all about connection. It's about the slow burn. It's about the yearning. It's about building something for the readers to connect to. And that's just so not present in the book. The only thing a reader could possibly connect to is the smut. And if you're not there for the smut, then there is really not much that you can grasp and like retain from this book that's meaningful in any way. I can only truly remember one conversation where they dove into anything that had any real meaning, and it was literally the first night they went out. It was the first time that they'd ever spoken outside of the smoothie shop, and they had maybe a 10-minute conversation that they cut short so then they could go and hook up. And that is the only conversation where anything about their families or their future, or even Kip's struggles with being closeted and being in the NHL. That is the only time they had a conversation where I felt like there was something there. And that was the most meaningful conversation they had in the entire section of the book that I read. And then again, they cut that short so they could go and hook up. It was so disappointing and so frustrating. And then like 2 weeks later, they're saying, "I love you." But even with the declarations of love, there is no true confession and understanding of why they're in love with each other, other than that they've, quote, never felt this way about anyone before. But they don't tell you the way that they feel. Scott expresses a little bit that he feels safe with Kip. But beyond that, there's nothing. He's hot. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's all there is to it. One is rich and one is hot. But all of that being said, I feel like I still could have stuck it out to the end. And then Kip did something that for me is a deal breaker and completely unforgivable. For reference, Kip went into this relationship knowing that Scott is a closeted homosexual hockey player. Scott makes this super clear from day one. He cannot come out or will not come out because of the way the hockey league feels about the LGBTQ plus community. The way his fellow teammates and coworkers throw around casual slurs and don't understand anyone that's different than who they are. He even mentions the fact that Black players in the NHL are not treated with civility, let alone someone who is gay or bisexual. And so this is something that Kip has known about this relationship from day one, and says he doesn't mind that, he'll have to keep their secret, and he'll keep a secret for him. But then as soon as they get into a relationship, Kip starts being sour about the fact that he's a secret and that Scott's in the closet. And I think that is truly unforgivable. I already didn't like Kip as a character, but that made him honestly, truly a villain to me. He almost immediately starts acting like a sullen little child when Scott says, "Oh, well, I'll come home and we'll hang out in my apartment." And Kip goes, "Oh, in your apartment." And he's all mad about it. And instead of expressing how he truly feels, he just segues the conversation into, guess what? A hookup scene. Yep, that's right. It's so gross. And it's just, I don't like it. And I'm really, really disappointed because in the reviews that I saw, the negative reviews that I saw for this book, even those ones mentioned that the second book is much better. But I find it hard to think that this same writer could write these very two-dimensional and flat characters, and then in the second book go on to write characters who have depth and complexity. And I am now kind of scared to go on and read the book. And while I do think the show is probably going to be really great, all the scenes I've seen from it so far, the actors seem to have a lot of chemistry, and there seems to be some discussion going on besides just the hooking up. I'm now worried that the second book is going to actually suck just as much, and it's going to really just make me not feel motivated to ever watch the show. So yeah, that's my commentary on the book. Super disappointing, super lifeless, super dull. It was a dud for me, and I wish I hadn't wasted my time with it. That's all I have for you today, and I'll see you in the next video.